Hello and welcome to the American Writers Festival's next program here on our partner stage. I'm Carol Mioseth. I'm Institutional Giving Manager at the museum, and our next program is presented by the American Library Association, which has been on the front lines of the fight for literary freedom since its establishment. In the past 2 years, challenges to books about American history and culture have seen unprecedented challenges from those opposed to acknowledging the stories of Black, brown, queer, and indigenous people. Here to talk about how to preserve the freedom to read are a group of writers and library professionals whose insights can help us fight the forces of censorship. Donna Seaman, adult books editor at ALA's Booklist, and a member of the content leadership team at the American Writers Museum. Heather Booth, Audiobooks Editor for Booklist, and a Reader's Advisory Librarian at the Helen Plum Library in Lombard, Illinois. If I could have your attention, please. Anna Claussen is the Policy and Outreach Coordinator for Libraries for the Illinois Secretary of State, and a longtime supporter of the fight against book bans, renowned mystery novelist whose latest book is Pay Dirt, Sara Paretsky. Welcome to you all.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful to see everyone here. We're going to talk about censorship. Censorship can be heavy-handed, or it can be covert and insidious, but it is always toxic, always dangerous. In this time of spiking book bans and attacks on our freedom of speech and our freedom to read, many launched by politically organized pressure groups, we can't help but look back to the 1930s, when fascism was on the march and World War II was in the offing, when books by writers designated as un-German by Nazi student organizations were burned, 25,000 in one night in May in 1933. In 1939, the American Library Association, headquartered here in Chicago, and set to celebrate its 150th birthday, issued the Library Bill of Rights. Amended over the decades, it continues to guide library policy. I'm not sure how many people know about the Library Bill of Rights outside of the library profession. It's short, and I'm going to read it to us. Number 1, books and other library resources should be provided for the interest, information, and enlightenment of all people of the community the library serves. Materials should not be excluded because of their origin, background, or views of those contributing to their creation. Number 2, libraries should provide materials and information presenting all points of view on current and historical issues. Materials should not be proscribed or removed because of partisan disapproval. Number 3, libraries should challenge censorship in the fulfillment of their responsibility to provide information and enlightenment. Number 4, libraries should cooperate with all persons and groups concerned with resisting abridgment of free expression and free access to ideas. Number 5, a person's right to use a library should not be denied or abridged because of origin, age, background, or views. Number 6, libraries which make exhibit spaces and meeting rooms available to the public they serve should make such facilities available on an equitable basis, regardless of the beliefs or affiliations of individuals or groups requesting their use. And finally, all people, regardless of origin, age, background, or views, possess a right to privacy and confidentiality in their library use. Libraries should advocate for, educate about, and protect people's privacy, safeguarding all library use data, including personally identifiable information. Major concepts here in the Library Bill of Rights. That was 1939. During the Cold War and the Red Scare, Senator Joseph McCarthy of Wisconsin produced a list of communist books to be confiscated and destroyed. This prompted Ray Bradbury to write his 1953 dystopian novel, Fahrenheit 451, depicting a future America in which books are outlawed and burned. In 1967, the American Library Association established its Office for Intellectual Freedom to educate librarians and the general public about the nature and importance of intellectual freedom in libraries, and to monitor book bans and help libraries respond to them. Banned Books Week was started in 1982. So this has been going on for quite a while. Now we're seeing a huge surge in book bans. The number of titles targeted for censorship in libraries, as Carol mentioned, rose 65% in 2023 compared to 2022, reaching the highest levels ever documented by ALA. A leap from 2,571 individual targeted titles to 4,240. Most books were challenged in public libraries. Nearly half of these titles were by LGBTQ+ and BIPOC writers. Librarians, professionals who have guided and encouraged so many of us here at the festival today, are also under threat for simply doing their jobs. We must be informed about our rights. We must speak out. We must defend our freedom to read. Our esteemed, wonderful panelists today are going to share their knowledge and their insights and their inspiration. I will welcome Heather Booth up here next. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you all so much. I'm so glad I could be here today to tell you a little bit about what library work is like. In addition to being a public librarian for over 20 years, I've also been a library trustee for about 9 years now. And I'm going to start, Donna quoted some of our foundational documents. I'm going to tell you about a few more. The 5 laws of library science are probably something that is new to you if you haven't studied library science, but they are dear to my heart. They were developed in 1931 by S.R. Ranganathan, who was a librarian in India and for whom India's Librarian Day is celebrated on his birthday. So they've guided my work because they're so flexible, and they've guided the work of many librarians who are facing this rash of book challenges today. Law 1, books are for use. Number 2, every person, his or her book. Every book, its reader, is number 3. Save the time of the reader is number 4, and number 5, a library is a growing organism. These are the tenets that guide our work. So when librarians read professional journals and select materials that we believe will suit the informational and recreational reading and viewing interests of our communities, it's because we want those resources to be used, because books are for use. When we work with patrons looking for something to read, whether it's to inform a research project or to provide escapism on a vacation, we're trying to be as thorough in our conversations as possible, asking questions about what the reader is interested in, asking them if they have any hot button issues that they don't want to read about. One time it was a person who couldn't read about anyone who'd had an organ transplant because she had just suffered a loss, and that was difficult for her. We're asking about character types and tropes that the reader can't get enough of, their favorite things. It's our aim to find the right book for the right reader at the right time. And sometimes it's a mismatch. Sometimes we make suggestions that miss the mark. It's happened to me a number of times over the years, like I'm sure it's happened to any librarian who's in the audience. Occasionally, patrons get upset about books that they pick up at our library or those that their children choose. And when those patrons come to tell us about that, we try again. We try harder. And we remind them that we're so very glad they came in to find a better book for themselves, because we believe in Ranganathan's second law, every person, their book. Unfortunately, this is where we seem to part ideological ways with the people in coordinated bad faith efforts that we've seen in recent years to seek to challenge to ban books across the country. Dealing with challenges is not new. As a librarian, I fielded a number of complaints from parents over the years related to the books that they didn't want their children to read. And this is really not something most librarians are greatly upset by, because that personalized service, law number 4, save the reader's time, and finding the right book for each person is part of our mission. But unlike the mother who was irate that her daughter chose a book that she found offensive and then came to tell me about it, and then left with a selection of books that were better suited to her house rules and her understanding of her own child's maturity level, these folks are not looking for the right book for the right reader at the right time. They see books, or more realistically, whole swaths of books, whole keyword searches full of titles that they're afraid of, viewpoints that they disagree with, authors whose lives are different from theirs, and they feel no one should have access to those books, or that access to those books should be decided by the library, which, let's remember, is a government entity, and not by parents. Something I've often heard during the public comment at the library board where I serve is that the books that these groups object to are so awful, no one in the community would ever want them. They're filth, they're pornography, and librarians and trustees who support their inclusion are essentially pedophiles, and these books have no place in public libraries. But the librarians who selected them did so with a full understanding of the literary landscape and the community in which they work. And they know that, as Ranganathan number 3 says, every book will have its reader. Number 5 is the library is a growing organism, and I want to talk about how it's growing and changing right now. Public libraries are busier than I can remember them being in my 2 decades in library service. We're helping people access computers to fill out immigration paperwork or create invoices for their small businesses. We're providing delivery service for homebound patrons. We're hosting book clubs on books that range from the classics to contemporary manga. We're offering space to students who are studying everything from high school entrance exams to the LSAT. We're selecting and sharing books in print and in digital formats. We're helping folks experience technology and creation devices in makerspace. It's an exhilarating time to be a librarian and work in libraries. And in this climate of reinvention and curiosity, it's incredibly demoralizing to have our every move doubted and our motives called into question. We've always had angry folks who shout things like, I pay your salary, when they don't get the right copies and the right change, and they don't think, they're dissatisfied with the service in some way. But this is a different level of criticism of public officials and public employees. It's not questioning the value we provide to the community, it's questioning the morality that is assumed that we have in our own lives and encourage in the lives of others. On top of that, at the extreme, librarians and trustees are being called pedophiles. During my last campaign for library trustee, I encountered this vitriol. People maligned me, accused me of being a terrible mother who must be an embarrassment to my children. I asked them, they said that I'm fine. They don't like the music I play at school pickup, that's what embarrasses them. I was told only pedophiles would want books in the library like the graphic novel Genderqueer, or Queer Ducks, a nonfiction book about animal behavior, or the gorgeous picture book about pretending and dressing up Julian as a mermaid. It's exhausting, it's demoralizing, and it's something that would easily dissuade many qualified potential candidates who love the library from running for library board. And those are the folks that we need on the library boards. What's infinitely more heartbreaking to me is that it's wearing on library staff. It's wearing on frontline staff and on the administration that is diverting time, energy, and funds toward addressing these complaints instead of supporting their communities and advancing library service. A number of library colleagues have reached out to me since I started working at Booklist, asking how I got out of libraries. They're looking to get out of a situation that feels toxic. It feels untenable. It's a situation that involves our very motives and chosen profession that we're called to be maligned. People don't come to work in libraries because of financial benefits. We don't become librarians for the great hours or the easy summers. We don't even become librarians because we love books. We become librarians because we love people, because we love communities, because we find value in supporting the people who are in our communities and are seeking the information they need to become the best versions of themselves that they want to be. Finding the books that they crave to enrich their lives and improve their ability to see the world a little bit differently, or to have their own experiences mirrored back to them and affirmed, to escape the drudgery or stresses of their daily lives and share some time with fantastical stories and characters that they love like friends. So what can we do to support our local libraries? Visit them, use them, get a library card, get to know the resources that are out there and tell your friends about them. Even though we are mostly, I'm assuming, here in Illinois, we have protections against book bans that we're going to hear about in a little bit, people are still challenging books programs, displays. Learn what processes there are at your library for filing a challenge. And if it sounds like it's happening a lot in your community, use the power of the Freedom of Information Act to get those requests for reconsideration forms. Learn what people are saying to your community library about the books that they don't want on the shelf, and then read those books for yourself. Once a request for reconsideration is filed, it usually goes to the library director, who's going to convene a group of librarians to examine the material, evaluate it, find professional reviews, etc., and make a determination of what's going to happen with that book. At that point, if the person who filed the request for reconsideration is not happy with the resolution, they can appeal it to the library board. Learn when those meetings are. Attend those meetings. Bring your friends and neighbors. Speak up. It's not always easy to do that, to stand up at a public meeting and make a comment during the public comment section. But like I told a colleague of mine just last month who was struggling with whether or not they should stay in public libraries, if the advocacy part was easy, if those services and viewpoints, those people wouldn't need advocates. It's hard, but we do it because we believe in the value of the public library in people's lives. We believe that everyone should be able to choose for themselves what is right for them, but not what is right for others. And we believe that that freedom to read is a cornerstone of our American democracy.
Thank you, Heather. That was very moving. It is my pleasure now to introduce Sara Paretsky, Chicago's own mystery writer, a social justice advocate. Her new book is Pay Dirt, and it's up on the 9th floor. Thank you, Sara.
Thank you, Donna. Heather, thank you for those powerful and deeply moving words. It makes me feel a real call to action and to become more involved in the Chicago Public Library than I have been in the past. On October 27th, 1553, John Calvin burned Michael Servetus at the stake because Servetus was a blasphemer whose ideas threatened the stability of the Geneva experiment. His book on the errors of the Trinity was especially threatening and was burned alongside him. Servetus had fled to Geneva from Catholic France, where they also wanted to kill him. His crimes basically amounted to challenging what today we call Christian nationalism. Servetus valued Jewish and Islamic teachings and read them in their original languages. The Christians at the time wanted all such writings burned. Burning a writer seemed like a good way to get other writers to keep their heterodox opinions to themselves. It took a long time before anyone else stood up to challenge the Trinity in public. So far, in contemporary America, as far as I know, we have not killed any writers for their provocative or offensive words. But 2 years ago, we came close. Someone attacked Salman Rushdie on a stage in Western New York and stabbed him 15 times before the assailant was restrained. Rushdie had been receiving death threats ever since he published the Satanic Verses in 1988, when the Ayatollah Khomeini issued a fatwa for his death. The fatwa led to worldwide riots at bookstores and publishing offices as mobs were stirred to silence the book. Many people died, including Rushdie's Japanese translator. Servetus's death was a state-authorized execution. While the fatwa was issued by Iran's head of state, the efforts to kill Rushdie were fueled by mob hysteria. While I don't know American writers who've been killed, I do know, as Heather just recounted, library and school board members who fight book bans. I know that they are facing frightening pushback. Lila Green Little took on her Texas County Library Board when they tried to close the library because the librarian refused to remove 801 titles from the shelves. Ms. Little is still in court. She is not a librarian. She wasn't even on the library board. She was a citizen, a speech therapist who took this on. She has had to move house to keep her children safe. She is stalked everywhere she goes. She is doxxed. She is threatened with the loss of her livelihood as a speech therapist, all because she stood up for the work that Judy Blume and Toni Morrison and the 4,000 plus other writers who've been banned in American libraries. Every writer's difficult journey is a movement from silence to speech. We must be intensely private and interior in order to find a voice and a vision. And we must bring our work to an outside world where the market or public outrage or government censorship can destroy our voice. This is by no means a new problem in America. In 1956, when Dashiell Hammett went to prison for refusing to identify people who had joined him in contributing to a bail fund for Black labor leaders, his publishers, Alfred Knopf and Company, took all of his books out of print. They were so afraid of State Department reprisals against their publishing company. It's the only time in the 95 years since he was first published that Hammett's books have been out of print. Today, with the consolidation in publishing down to 5 major houses, there is less and less support for writers who paint outside some pretty restrictive lines. I myself am currently without an American publisher because I'm working on a novel that doesn't feature V.I. Warshawski. She's my brand, I've been informed, as if I've been producing toothpaste but now want to make tampons. If you've been buying Sarah's toothpaste, you won't take a chance on her tampons. New writers are turning to Amazon for publication. They can make money, which they can't with New York houses, whose promotion budgets are now tied to celebrities and ever-reliable writers like James Patterson and Danielle Steele. Subbing with Amazon requires a long spoon. The behemoth controls 65% of all books published in all formats in this country. When publishers don't bend to their will on cutting, for instance, the money that Amazon will pay to writers for the books that they sell, the giant simply stops carrying books by that publisher. That happened about 6 years ago with Hachette, which owns the company that publishes me in England. The market has become a most vengeful and effective silencer of the written word. Silence is also created by public hysteria, as happened with Elizabeth Gilbert. The highly successful author of Eat, Pray, Love withdrew her new novel, The Snow Forest, from publication because of public outrage, massive public outrage, for her setting a novel in Russia while Ukraine was fighting for its life. The Ayatollah never read the Satanic Verses. He knew by instinct that it was blasphemous. The mobs at library and school board meetings have not read the books they want banned. They know by the titles or by some mysterious voice in their dental fillings that these titles are threatening our children. And the protesters of Elizabeth Gilbert's novel hadn't read it because all the outcry came before the book was published. My own stories come to me from the events around me, but the events around me today are defying my ability to turn them into stories. I have often written about corporate corruption and the cynical influence of large institutions to the well-being of ordinary citizens, but Amazon and Tesla defy even my imagination. My detective often turns to her friend Murray Ryerson, a reporter who can publicize what's happened and make it hard for the criminals to hold on to their jobs, even if they avoid prosecution. But all over America, newspapers like Murray's have been bought by giant media conglomerates, which spent the early years of this century decimating their newsrooms. Every time they cut their reporting staff in half, their stock prices doubled. One of the biggest dangers to our republic is the loss of local news coverage. It used to be that every town, even tiny ones, had some kind of newspaper. It covered weddings and funerals and fires, but its reporters also attended school board, library board, county commission meetings, and so on. A local paper would have written about the effort to take over a board by a determined, ideologically driven minority. We citizens are passionate about our local politics, but in the absence of local news, we often learn only after the fact that our libraries and schools have come under the control of extremists. A case study in knowing what you're protesting played out in Texas this spring. A woman named Courtney Gore won a seat on her local school board, her county school board. She knew that the children in her district were reading books that were grooming them to become LGBT or Q. She knew that they were reading books that disrespected Christianity. She knew these things because her claque had told her so. She had never actually seen the county curricula. With the support of her church and her political party, she coasted to victory. And then, because she was a conscientious soul, she took home all the curricula from all the schools in her county, and she spent weeks studying them. And she found that there was no grooming of children and no disrespecting of Christianity. She was overjoyed to know that the children in her county were safe in the hands of their teachers and librarians. She reported back to her supporters, sure that they would share her relief. Instead, they turned on her like a pack of rabid jackals. They want her to bury her findings. They want public schools in their county to close so that they can turn their children's education over to for-profit companies. Courtney Gore now needs police protection to go to school board meetings. But I admire this woman enormously. She is not backing down, and she had the courage and the strength to change her opinions. That is some courage. This is frankly a terrifying time in our country for readers, for writers, for booksellers, but above all, as Heather has documented, for librarians. I am grateful that I've never received death threats, but as the level of anger in this country has risen, so has the vitriol that I've received in emails. A number of my novels have touched on issues around refugees and immigrants. Readers who want to limit the number of people who come to our country have often written me to protest the positive depiction I give immigrants. They tell me to stop forcing my liberal politics down their throats. However, in the last 5 years, these messages have become ever more inflamed. One of my recent novels, Overboard, generated the angriest letters I've ever received. It's probably the least political of my recent books, and I was baffled by what was causing the screaming until one reader spelled it out. In Overboard, which I wrote during lockdown, VI requires people to wear masks when they are in her office. This made me both a fascist and a libtard. Actually, I love the word libtard. It makes me think that I might be a ballerina in my liberal leotard. But when I was a child, I hoped I would grow up to be Margaret Fontaine. That never happened. One reader wrote that she hoped robbers would break into my home and that the police would not show up while the robbers were beating me up. Most readers who object to my writing say they want to be entertained, not exposed to political rhetoric. 3 books that the Llano, Texas Library Board, among the 801 that they wanted taken out of their library, were My Butt is So Noisy, I Broke My Butt, and I Need a New Butt. You might think that these were entertainment, maybe not for you, but for your 3 or 4-year-old. However, they are now political books. These are now grooming books that are like, I don't know, training children to go to the bathroom. In Iran, books are banned for blasphemous content. That's the kind of overriding rubric that the government uses. In Russia, books are banned for their opposition to the state. In America, we call books pornographic or pushing a political agenda. But in all three countries, the same or similar titles are banned, especially those books depicting LGBTQ characters in a sympathetic way. In all three countries, government, whether national or usually in our case local, is choosing what we and our children can or cannot read. When I was doing research for this talk, I came on a book called Books on Fire by a French historian named Lucien Polastron. It was a fascinating history in a hideous sort of way because it detailed the vast numbers of books and scrolls and papyri that have been burned in the brief 5,000 years of the written word. Faced with the many millions of books destroyed in the Second World War alone, some writers Polastron quotes threw up their hands in despair. What was the point of writing anything, of adding to the world's philosophy or poetry or stories, if their words had no effect on public behavior, if books were still burned, if people were still massacred by the millions? These writers felt so helpless that they retreated behind a self-created wall of silence. Well, I have the opposite reaction. I think that the passion books inflame is proof that they are doing their job and that we writers are doing our job. Stalin sent the poets Mandelstam and Tsvetaeva to die in the gulags because of the power of their words in the Russian imagination. Writers besides Michael Servetus who've been burned for their words include Rabbi Akiba, burned by the Romans in 137 Jerusalem, with the scrolls of that most dangerous book, the Torah, around him. My personal icon among people murdered by fire is Joan of Arc. She wasn't a writer. She was illiterate, and her illiteracy paradoxically contributed to her death. Noble-born women of her era had visions similar to hers, but their status made authorities think their visions were safe. An illiterate peasant threatened the social order. I came to Joan as a 10-year-old. I came to her through a book. My parents worried that my intense personality would make my adult life turbulent and difficult, and they were right. They gave me Mark Twain's personal recollections of Joan of Arc to warn me of the fate that awaited girls who took life too intensely. Unfortunately, the book had kind of a kickback effect on me. It made me long for a vision as intense as Joan's, one that I might follow to the stake. Even now, in my older age, that is still the longing that guides me. 2,600 years ago, the poet Sappho wrote, "Although they are only breath, words which I command are immortal." That word, which is only breath, has survived countless wars, fires, murders, mutilations. That word will endure, it will triumph, but only if those of us in this room, those of us who have dedicated our lives to this word, stand strong. For myself, I pray that in the turbulent days that are surely coming, I keep my own shape aligned with Joan's, that I don't let fear silence me. I pray that she will help me face and fight the monsters that threaten to devour us. Thank you very much.
Sara, thank you so much. I knew you would have a lot to tell us, and so beautifully told. So grateful to you. And now I want to introduce Anna Claussen, who I'm so thrilled is here with us today. She's the Policy and Outreach Coordinator for Libraries for the Illinois Secretary of State, and will tell us why our state is kind of special on this front. Thank you, Anna.
So I work for the Illinois Secretary of State and our state librarian, Alexi Janulius. And last year we introduced legislation to ban book bans. It was signed in this very building, and in order to comply with the legislation, our library, thank you. It began before our secretary even entered office. We talked to librarians throughout the state to see their issues and what is happening. And unprecedented year after unprecedented year, we're having these book bans, we're having threats to our librarians, and it is frightening and frustrating. And what I want to talk about this legislation is that, as we heard earlier, the libraries must comply with the Library Bill of Rights, sign it within their board, or do their own Bill of Rights in a sense where they state that libraries will not ban books based on groups or personal issues with the book. And for that, if they do not sign these things, they cannot receive state money from the state library, which there are competitive grants that we have, but we also have equalization standardized grants that are started by the legislator. And this has gone great so far because talking to librarians, we wanted to do legislation that reflected their needs and what they want. We want to try to remove the issue that we have of people coming in and harassing our librarians, which we know hasn't stopped. With this legislation, we are hoping to curb book bans, but it will not be all of it, and I think that's really important to talk about. The biggest things that we as civilians need to do is vote, which is a frustrating thing to say, I'm aware, but you need to vote for your library board if it's elected. That is something that you must pay attention to, voting for your mayors and your local authorities who put these people in place. It is critically important, and on top of that, also pay attention. Every library board must submit their minutes. Keep lookout if they're having odd interactions, if they are removing books, or if they're having frustrating things. Go up and show your support, and also go in and show that you are upset by something that happens. So those are the two big things. And then I want to add to what the others have said. Local journalism is so needed, and that is something that actually brought forward a pretty upsetting event that is happening in Southern Illinois right now. The language that people are using against people like myself and people on this stage is truly frightening. My library had a bomb threat. Libraries throughout the state are having bomb threats. I never would have expected, working for the state librarian, that I would have to see bomb dogs on a weekly basis. So it's really important that we have everybody here. It's really important that we know that we have this legislation, and it is a big step. It is being covered, or it's being copied greatly by other states throughout the country. We want more of that, but it's not it. And I think what is most important to kind of stress to everybody is that these book bans are not popular. The people who are banning books are a minority, and they're angry, and they're loud. Whenever we have people come and support the libraries after a weird event, after a violent event, after threatening this, people come in droves and they support. In Metropolis specifically, where we're having an issue, when it came out from that local journalist about what was happening in that library, they were taking books and taking furniture. It was quite odd, but lawyers came in from the community and they were like, this is against the law. We know this is against the law. This is against state law, this is against federal law. Something that Secretary Janulius always says is that if you have issues with our legislation now, if you're confused at all about anything that's happening, we have Federalist Papers that protect our right of freedom of speech and our freedom against censorship. So that's our overview of the bill. And I'm really proud to be work for the state library. It is one of the most interesting parts of my life, and it's also been one of the most frustrating parts of my life. But I think that's those are the best parts of life, in my opinion. But I'm really glad to be in this group of people that are dedicated against hate, basically. And I love what we heard earlier about, like, librarians come to work with people. They have master's degrees in library science. They could be doing things that make bunches of more money, but they come in here and they come and work for us, all of us. So it is important to support them. And especially in this time when they are getting threats daily, they're being menaced online. We've submitted new legislation that is being discussed right now about giving the same protections to librarians as we do to other public employees and as school teachers as well. And I think it's very important that we put librarians within the same class and they have the same protections that we give to other people. And yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you to my incredible panelists. That was so moving. We were going to have one more round and talk about Unite Against Book Bans, so we've run out of time. But Deborah Caldwell-Stone is here with us. She's just going to say a couple of words. Please come up to the 9th floor. We have a table with all kinds of material. So Deborah Caldwell-Stone, Office of Intellectual Freedom Director, will close us out. Thank you. Thank you, like a minute.
Yeah. Thank you, Donna. As Donna says, I work for the Office for Intellectual Freedom. We're the office that provides direct support to librarians and libraries facing censorship. And, you know, we're facing an incredible organized campaign of censorship that's been very effective for the last few years. And we have a campaign for you to work locally. All book bans are local. It's something that it's been touched on here. But censorship happens at library boards. Censorship happens at school boards. And it happens in some state legislatures. And Unite Against Books Ban is an initiative to empower individuals like you to speak up at school board meetings, library board meetings, and with your state legislatures to fight censorship. Because often these folks are the only voice in the room. And when there is another voice in the room, their efforts to censor books fail. Unite Against Book Bans has a toolkit for you. It has voter information tools. It even has book resumes. These are one-pagers that illustrate both the literary and educational value of these challenge books. And I can tell you the misinformation and disinformation about some of these books, particularly books that touch on the lives and experiences of LGBTQ persons, is incredible. So we need people like you out there. Please come visit us up on the 9th floor. We have a table, and we can talk to you about the campaign and how you can join it. I want to remind you that each demand to ban a book is a demand to deny each person's constitutionally protected right to choose and read books that raise important issues and lift up the voices of people who are often marginalized in our society. Each demand to ban a book is an attempt to silence authors and close off access to ideas. By joining Unite Against Book Bans and joining with other organizations that support libraries, schools, and civil liberties, we can end this attack on our essential community institutions and our civil liberties. Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah. Thank you so much. I hope we'll see you up on the 9th floor. Thanks again to Sara Paretsky, Heather Booth, Anna Claussen, and Deborah Caldwell-Stone. Fight the good fight. Thank you.